Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, a podcast that aims to address divorce, separation and co-parenting here in the UK, countering the often sensationalist way it's portrayed in the media, challenging the status quo and driving for reform. On each episode, I'm joined by experts to discuss divorce, separation and co-parenting from different angles and to give their opinions and to debate them. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor and divorce coach, co-founder of Amicable, the divorce services company, and host of this divorce podcast. In this episode, I was joined by Kathryn Colas, who is a respected pioneer and a voice on the subject of menopause. Kathryn founded SimplyHormones in 2007, following her own struggle, which spanned over 10 years. In 2020, she launched her first book, How to Survive Menopause Without Losing Your Mind. I was really interested in hearing about how many of the symptoms experienced by women occur post-menopause and can have a dramatic effect on their relationship. We discussed how the various challenges women and men face during this transitionary period can be aided by equipping yourself with knowledge around the topic. It's clear that for many, separating the byproducts of menopause and the other causes of relationship breakdown can be really challenging and indistinct. We explored how the conversation around menopause needs to change in order to start reducing the stigma which exists and the impact this can have on relationships and marriage. I think you'll find this a really informative episode. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's lovely to meet you, and thank you for giving up your time to come and do the podcast. Menopause is a massive topic and it has so many impacts on people's lives, all sorts of impacts. And I guess the main topic for today is going to be the impact it has on relationships. But just before we get into that, maybe for people who aren't yet there or not sure if they're there or not, maybe you could just start by explaining a little bit about the changes that women go through when they reach menopause and some common symptoms.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of myth and misunderstanding still around the word menopause and what women can expect or how they see themselves transitioning through this time in their lives. Mostly women think it's for older women, so anyone over 50, 55, that's menopause. But actually, hormones start changing around the age of 35. So when you're around about 45, I'd say that's when you start to notice more PMS. If you've experienced PMS, it becomes more regular. And menopause is PMS on speed. That's how I describe it. So we've heard about hot flushes and sweating, and that can be very detrimental to women's appearances, how they're working, their working procedures, what they're like at home. They can be flushing throughout the day and night, and also sweating. And in some instances, women are regularly changing their clothing and their bed linen because of the excessive sweating they experience. It's like, I didn't suffer from it too badly, but when I did suffer from it, it was like I'd wake up, put my hand to my chest, and it felt as if somebody had thrown a glass of water over me. That was how wet it was. So it's not just feeling damp. You really do feel wet, and it's uncomfortable.
So this isn't a subtle thing by the sounds of it, then. It's something that's has quite a big forceful impact. It's not something you're not going to notice. It's going to be right there, sort of slapping you in the face almost.
Some women may not experience it at all, but others will experience it excessively, like many things. It's in degrees depending on your physiology. But I think most importantly for women is the psychological aspect of menopause, not understanding that our hormones are controlling our brain functions, which in turn control our bodily functions. So we're talking about emotions and crying for no reason, having a row with somebody and wondering what happened. What was that all about? And there are a number of symptoms that it's worth women looking up and ticking those boxes, because that's what happened to me. And I kept reading all these different things and thinking, really? really. That's a symptom. That's a symptom. And it's just, I think, basically understanding the fact that the sex hormone estrogen has been controlling women's reproductive cycles for the last 40 years, 30 or 40 years. And all of a sudden, that's leaving us. That's going on a long hike, long holiday, never to return. And women will spend the next the 30% of their lives in postmenopause. So it's a long time to think about. And the transition from perimenopause to postmenopause takes about 10 years. Some people notice it, others don't.
So menopause isn't an event. It feels like a long transition process rather than a one-off thing that happens and at some point you'll wake up and that will be the end of it. It feels more like a gradual transition.
Yes. Yeah. And even when you're postmenopausal and you think, oh, great, no more periods, that's it, I'm out of here. And at that point is when some women start experiencing symptoms. And in others, certain symptoms are still continuing and will graduate off. So it can be a real minefield for women, and it can be frightening, especially when they think they've got dementia because they can't remember anything. And in 99.9% cases, they don't. So it's just about a little bit of knowledge goes a long way, I think.
So it sounds like there's a huge number of changes. And as you say, we're perhaps quite well versed in understanding some or having heard about some of the physiological changes to the sweating and the flushing. But it's interesting, the psychological changes, so the anxiety, loss of confidence, those sorts of things, the emotions, the high emotions, the low emotions, those sorts of things feel like they're going to play much more into your relationship. And I think you have some personal experience of that, don't you? Tell me a little bit about what happened when you started experiencing those emotional changes.
Well, I didn't know what it was. I didn't realise that I was transitioning menopause, as we now call it, until I was post-menopausal. And that's when my marriage started to fall apart. I was falling apart. I was diagnosed with depression. I self-diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I know that's a serious illness, but I was ticking those boxes. I'd gone on to Dr. Google, found out what was going on, and it was bipolar syndrome. And luckily, it was a few years later, I was interviewing a lovely menopause specialist, Professor John Studd, and I asked him the question. I said, this sounds daft, me asking you this question, because I know it's a serious mental health issue, but I self-diagnosed with bipolar. And he said, yes, so many women, this happens to so many women as they go through menopause. Who knew? Who's telling us? Who knew that we would go absolutely mental, as we might describe it, that we can't feel as if we can't control things that are going on. But once you have the knowledge.
Just to explain that a little bit more. So when you say you were experiencing symptoms of bipolar, for people that don't know what bipolar means, what sort of things were happening to you and how was that impacting on your relationship?
Yeah, well, two or three things are going on here. Just to explain bipolar. Bipolar is often seen as you have moments of high activity. You are OTT when it comes to wanting to do things and have high energy, high activity. You've got to do this stuff. And then the reverse side of that is that you're on the floor and you feel so depressed and in such a dark place. You have thoughts of suicide, as I did, and I'm a glass half full type of person. I've never been. I don't think in those dark terms, but in this situation, I was, and I couldn't understand it. And then affecting the way it affected my work. I resigned from my job because I thought, what's going on here? This must be work-life balance, and it so absolutely wasn't. It was hormones. And then with my relationship, we were just rowing all the time. We couldn't have a conversation with it escalating into very loud voices. We couldn't have a conversation without me bursting into tears. We couldn't have a conversation without me not being able to vocalize what I was trying to say. I could not find the words to express what was going on in my mind and body and my thought processes around our relationship. What I did know was that I didn't want to divorce. to me, that was the abyss. That was jumping over the cliff. I've got 3 children. One was still going through puberty at that time. She was a teenager, but I had 2 grown-up children as well. And I could just see trouble ahead around the word children and who they were going to stay with. And I couldn't face that. And I thought to myself, we've been married over 25 years at that time, and we loved each other. And we have 3 beautiful children. We'd built a good business together. We'd worked hard and were now, gaining the fruits of our labors, as they say. But I didn't want to do it with this person anymore. My libido had disappeared. I did not want sex, anything to do with it. We've got a super king size bed, so they are very big beds. And we're not big people. I'm 5'2". My husband's 5'8". And I would sleep on the edge of that bed because I didn't want to be anywhere near him. I couldn't sleep in another room because that indicated trouble to me. That indicated more battlegrounds. So I just, stayed on the edge of my bed and probably didn't sleep well for a number of years. And it was only when I was reading about psychology. So as well as the hormones, I'm reading about psychology generally and how we build our own walls. And, I was in a dark grey box with no windows, but almost being like a prison, but it wasn't, because it was like a safe place as well. It was a place I could retreat to where nobody could touch me. And I didn't know how I was going to get out of that. I went to the doctor. I was diagnosed with depression. I was referred to a psychiatrist, and that was scary because psychiatry means big stuff. It's mental health stuff.
Did you tell your husband at the time about the diagnoses then? Were you able to talk to him at that point, or did you feel it was something you had to carry on your own?
Yes, I said I'd been diagnosed with depression, but because the doctor hadn't said this could be related to menopause.
Yeah, it was something separate. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when I went to see the psychiatrist, he recommended antidepressants, very strong antidepressants. And I didn't want to go. I asked him, what about them? What do they do? How long does it take to wean yourself off them? And I wasn't happy with the answers he was giving me. So I said, well, what else is there? And he said cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which we know a lot more about now. But when I started, again, I had no idea what I was doing there. I accepted that treatment. And I went along, suited and booted, as I always do. But the therapist didn't give me any parameters, any goalposts. I now know that when you have CBT or any kind of psychotherapy, you have goalposts. They say this should last 3 months, 6 months, whatever. And during this time, we will achieve A, B, and C. But that didn't happen. I was told I just needed to talk. And it was helpful, but it was also very distressing, peeling back the onion skins, as they say, which I read about in my psychology books, and how that did help. And I ended up analysing my husband, analysing my father, going right back to my childhood in an effort to find out who am I, because I'd lost me. I didn't know who on earth I was anymore. So it was helpful, but it just took a very, very long time.
And you've written in your book, haven't you, there's a whole chapter dedicated to men and men's experience. Tell me how your husband experienced your menopause then.
Well, I interviewed him when I was in the safe, shall we say, the safe place of post-menopause. I interviewed him about what it was like to live with a woman going through menopause. And I was, had my notebook ready, as I do, and I was in tears hearing about him describing this woman he'd been living with. It was like living with a stranger, sleeping with a stranger. Who was this woman? This wasn't the woman I married, which you hear that a lot, that term, but I think what men really mean, pre-menopause, you weren't like this. You were different. You weren't aggressive. You weren't always looking as if you always wanted to start a fight. You weren't a victim. You weren't all sorts of things. That your whole personality, my whole personality, seemed to change, and that seems to be reflected in a lot of women. And I said to him, well, if you can sum up menopause in a short sentence, how would you describe it? And he said, I would describe menopause. Menopause is like a hurricane. It's dangerous and deadly. And I thought, oh my God, that is so powerful, what he just said. And I subsequently interviewed a number of men for my book. And one of them in particular, I got on so well because of, I don't know, maybe the type of personality he was, but he was prepared to answer lots of questions for me. And he wanted to remain anonymous. He's anonymous in my book, but I think he's come out and said, actually, I'm that guy in Kathryn's book. And he did a lot of research into mental health in men, and how that rises as they reach middle age as well, and how suicide is very high in men going through that phase of their life. And so we had a lot of interesting things to talk about, and he gave me some interesting data from his perspective and other men he'd discussed this with, which of course is in my book, chapter 10, The Men's Room. So we've got to get men involved. They all say, without a doubt, we've got to get men understanding menopause, because it's destroying relationships.
It feels like a big ask, because many women still aren't au fait and comfortable talking about menopause, are they? It still feels like there's a lot of stigma about it. It's something that traditionally hasn't been discussed, or if it has, it's been in those very sort of quiet, whispered type voices, hasn't it? And it's kind of like something off Les Dawson almost, isn't it? Where you don't say the words, you don't say it out loud. So if us as women, we're not comfortable yet, we're not there yet, it feels like quite a stretch to get men on board as well. But why is it still a stigma? What is it that we are still ashamed of or not comfortable with?
I think it's seen from a woman's perspective that she is aging. She is now old. And of course, we all know that that's rubbish now. If you look at women of my age now and my mother at the same age, we are completely different people. And even women at 50, they have so much vitality, so much desire to live and progress and learn. We're all still learning, and we all want to learn so much. Women's health has become a multi-billion-dollar industry because they are so interested in understanding more about staying well for as long as they can. My big aim when I was going through menopause was, I hope I don't end up with osteoporosis and a Zimmer frame. And so far I've kept that at bay, but I think it's just acknowledging, or having that knowledge of my own health, what hormones are doing to my body, have done to my body, have provided for the benefit of my body. And now that they have declined, what happens next? So learning about degenerative diseases and how you can help resolve some of those. Change in lifestyle is probably the biggest tick box that people can make when it comes to growing older. But certainly menopause itself, that stigma is about the feeling that they're getting old, the feeling at work that they are sidelined, that they're not included in certain training programs, even though they'd love to do it, but they don't put their hand up and say, oh, what about me? I'd really love to do that, because they're frightened of being told, well, no, I don't think you're suitable for this. And in brackets, because of your age. So I think it's still down to an age thing. And I think that happens to men as well as they get past 50.
I'm just interested in something you said a little bit earlier about you. You said earlier that you knew you didn't want to get divorced. So how do you know the difference between a relationship breakdown and going through the menopause? What are there some telltale signs that differentiate a broken relationship from a relationship that's suffering from a change within one person that's not the end of the world and the relationship is survivable?
Yeah, I think it's that knowledge about menopause symptoms and what it can do to you emotionally and psychologically, and thinking, is that what is affecting my marriage, or have we just reached the end of the road? It always seemed to be a case where, oh, you've just outlived each other's, you want different things now. But it's not that. When you drill down to the nitty-gritty, men still love the women they're married to, or their partners, or whatever kind of situation they are in. And they don't want it destroyed, but they can't understand why it's happening. And actually, men are very insightful. They can see the change that has happened in their partners, and they do the research on the internet, and they make the suggestion, but the woman doesn't want to hear it. I think they're better now. But, in 10 years ago, it was, I don't want to hear this. That's older women, nothing to do with me. You're rubbish. You don't know what you're talking about. And you'd have another row. So the marriage would break down through lack of communication. Communication is key as far as I'm concerned. I couldn't have a conversation with my husband, as I said, without escalating into shouting and also crying, which men don't like to see. But I just couldn't. I didn't know why I was crying. I just burst into tears. But that it's your hormones again. And in the end, I knew, well, I can't speak to him as a normal human being, what I would consider just a conversational piece. So I'm going to write it down. So I wrote him a letter about all my thoughts and feelings, and asked him to think about it. And then we would have a conversation where I don't want you shouting at me and I won't shout at you. And we'll do our best to talk about this and try and understand what's happened to me, to you, and how we can turn that around and come back again.
Okay. So almost like you had to have almost a self-facilitated session then, where you had to think very carefully about your communication, but something in you, presumably to want to try still and to want to put the effort into that process, you obviously felt that there was something fundamentally still there. And that feels like the difference between, say, somebody who's experiencing relationship breakdown, where they've lost that desire to try, versus your scenario where it could easily on the surface have looked like a relationship breakdown, but there was something still fundamentally there and connecting the two of you by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I think it was very basic in my case, and I think it is a very fine line.
Yeah, it sounds like a close call. It's making me feel nervous for people, yeah.
It could have gone either way, but for me, I have to say, it wasn't so much an emotional desire to stay in that relationship. It was very material. What happens when people divorce? Everything's split up. There's trauma. It involves the kids. It doesn't matter how well-mannered and polite you are, rows ensue. And we don't, as human beings, we don't seem to be able to get past that. So I have a beautiful house, car. We have a house in Spain. We have a lovely life. And I looked at cutting that in half. I looked at me buying my husband out. I looked at my husband buying me out, and neither of us could afford it. So what does that mean? I'm going to be left living in a caravan? No, thank you. So on the basis of the material things, that was my survival.
Right. So you made a very conscious choice that your lifestyle was important, and therefore you would make the adjustments necessary within the relationship to maintain that.
Yes. But everything else, once I'd decided that, and once we took that decision to not go to the solicitors, to really talk about what was going on, to go on holiday and say, well, let's discuss, the phones aren't ringing, nothing's going on. Let's just talk about our lives and what we both want out of it. And I think that's where the love returned. I was then on HRT, so my libido was returning. And that's very important in a relationship, especially where the partner is aging as well. So the emotional side of it, I could see we had so many. I did a list. We had so many things in common. We had the same sense of humour. We loved art, architecture, all sorts of crazy things, having fun. And so I thought, how am I going to achieve that? A, on my own, or B, do I want to look for another partner? No, I don't. I didn't then, and I don't now.
And what about, so let's take the example of, say, women who are in the process of divorcing now and maybe are also going through menopause. What do you think are the additional challenges for people in those circumstances?
I think it would be to think about what's happening right now. Are you sure that divorce is going to be the answer? Are you in a situation where you realize that your symptoms that you are going through menopause, you're perimenopausal, and that these symptoms can sometimes cause emotional things to happen that you might have made a different decision about a few years earlier? But you're making this decision today. Are you making the right decision for the right reasons? Do you need to talk to somebody about that? Somebody who understands menopause, I have to say, because I looked into relationship consultants when this was happening to myself and my husband. A, he didn't want to go and see a relationship advisor. And B, when I looked on their websites, menopause wasn't mentioned. So even, and I think it's better now. I haven't looked at them for a while. I hope it's better now. But relationship therapists didn't understand menopause enough to bring that understanding into any conversation they had with both partners. And so it was always their basic training, their basic understanding of why relationships break down, and not how menopause symptoms can interfere and really cause such ructions in the middle of all that. It's not plain irretrievable breakdown of a relationship. There's other stuff going on. And if you think that's happening to you, then my advice would be just to take a step back and think about it. Take a long time to think about it. You know, I was listening. I turned on the radio one day years ago, and it was Woman's Hour on Radio 4, and they'd just been talking about menopause. I'd missed the section, but at the end, this doctor was on the call, and he said, if only I'd known more about my wife's menopause symptoms, we wouldn't have got divorced. What does that tell you? You know, there's so much to answer for, and I think it's self-awareness.
I like that advice then. So if you're going through a sticky relationship patch and you think you may be in menopause, then just straight relationship counselling doesn't sound like it's going to be, you know, it will be helpful, but it's not going to really get to the bottom of this, is it? It sounds like you should be looking for a relationship specialist who has that menopause experience as well, to really try and work out the difference between irretrievable relationship breakdown, as you said, and a bad patch because of the influence of the menopause. Fascinating.
Yeah, and a bad patch that may last several years. You know, the guys
so it's not to dismiss it, is it? Because like you say, you might be in a bad patch. Just knowing is one thing, but then actually navigating is another thing, isn't it? To actually navigate through that bad patch, which, as you say, could be an extended period of time, is something else.
Yeah, and some men have already divorced, and they want to know, can I get my relationship back again? And that's even harder because you've already gone down that road of divorce. And it's just very, very, unless you have two people willing to cooperate in any relationship, then it's not going to fare very well, is it?
No, exactly. I mean, one of the things that, you might be, we've talked about this in terms of a woman making the choice, but what if your partner has made a choice and you're on the receiving end of that? So you're given the news that you are being divorced. Menopause, then, when you've got that kind of catastrophic decision being made and you're being informed of it, and you are dealing with such a big life-changing event, and you've got menopausal hormonal issues going on. I mean, how on earth do you cope in those circumstances? Where do you go for that kind of help?
Yeah, well, two things there. It's mostly women who initiate divorce proceedings when they're going through menopause. But if it is the male partner that's initiating divorce, I think there is opportunity there to still have a conversation. And I know there are arbitrary procedures in place where people can have conversations without it going through the courts. And perhaps that's another place for that to, where again, the woman may not be able to find her voice to say exactly what she means. But I'm sure she will be able to her solicitor or her legal representative, to say, this is what I think is happening. I don't know how to say this. I don't have the words, but I've written it down for you. Can we do something with this? And then approach the other party together around a table, I suggest, not via email or letter, because that's, we all know, it gets lost in translation. But to have a discussion around a table in a safe place where there is no fear of malice or anything that's going to upset either party, to prevent them to having a decent conversation about the situation, which allows them time to stand back and think before they proceed further. Whatever next steps they take that time to think about it because of the circumstances that are involved.
So it sounds like, you're saying to people, exercise caution. This is a tricky time of life to navigate. And it might be that your relationship hasn't broken down. It might be that you're experiencing some quite extreme feelings around menopause or emotions, and take the time to investigate whether that is the case.
Yes, precisely.
Just interested as well, you mentioned you had children when you were going through this, and one of them was still going through puberty. What impact does it have on parenting or co-parenting when you're going through menopause?
Well, parenting, if you have children who are teenagers, you're going through the opposite ends of the spectrum. You have the banging doors, slamming doors, crashing windows, swearing at each other, just as you would if you were a teenager. So you're both doing it. And my daughter, as a result of all this, is now very well informed about menopause. And even at 15 or 16, she was at school and the girls would come in and say, oh, my mum this and my mum that. And, oh, she's absolutely awful, and calling them all names as they do. And my daughter would say, well, she looked at my mum's website. Perhaps she's going through menopause. Sounds like it to me, because that's what happened to my mum. And so, we need to bring the young people into it as well. When we're doing talks and seminars and even training, when there are young people in the room, and I say young, working age between 20 and 30, 35, they sit there and their jaws drop and they're going, what? Why don't we know about this? We need to know more about this. And they are so engaged with finding out more, both the boys and the girls, about finding out more about hormones and how hormones are affecting men's lives and women's lives, and what we can do about it.
And any final tips in terms of, what you would recommend people do if they think they're heading for a relationship breakdown? What are the early things people can do to head that off, do you think?
I think it's, as you said earlier, show caution. And it's like when you've been upset by something, you've received something through the post, and it's absolutely not what you expected to receive. So you type off an email and send it, or you've had an email from your boss and you're disgusted, and you send off an email straight away, and it's horrendous the words that you've thrown on that page, because your mind is in a state of anguish at that time. So now, since I went through menopause, now when I've got tough emails to write, I write them and then I leave them in the draft box on purpose, so that I can look at them the next day and say, was I going to say that? No, we'll turn that round and we'll change that. Because obviously you're more reasonable. Having slept on it, you're more reasonable, and you can look at things differently on another day. So let's leave it for 24 hours or longer and just think about what's been said and what's been done. Take the steam out of it. Don't be offended by what's going on, because you're both in an emotional state. So try and sit back, as a third party might even, and assess the situation as to what it really is all about. And it all comes down to emotion, doesn't it, at the end of the day? But yeah, just think long and hard and take time.
And what do you think your husband would say if he had to sum up his experience and, sailing that close to the wind? What do you think he would say to a friend, another man or whatever in the same circumstance?
Well, he acts as an advocate in a way, really. He plays golf, and so men are chatting around the golf course and they talk to each other. And so he gives them advice. He says, talk to my wife, go and look at my wife's website. This and that's happening. And he really takes an interest in it because he knows how devastating it can be if you just allow it to grow and explode and become something it doesn't need to be. Just taking those early steps of understanding can prevent the car crash at the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you had to get to a pretty extreme place before you were able to kind of claw that back and to start working on the relationship. And if your website and the book can help people avoid that extreme by looking at the signals and spotting them early and engaging in a conversation with their partner before it gets to a crisis point, that has to be a really positive thing.
Yeah, and I think being the age of 40, 45, not to be afraid to look at menopause, because, women are going earlier and earlier through menopause. It used to be a minority issue of younger women going through menopause, but we're seeing more and more of it. We don't know why just yet. There is some research being done. But by the same token, if you're 40 and you think, oh, I've heard about this menopause stuff, could that be me? No, surely not. That's it. Not thinking about it again. I urge you to look at it, to look at my book. There are stories in there about early menopause and from women of my own age, but it's about relating your own symptoms to the stories that you're hearing or you're reading about. That's what I have found has been most important to women. I might be standing on a stage and talking, and sometimes you think, are they listening? Are they enjoying what I'm talking about? Because there's silence in the room, and it's because they're so engaged with what's going on. And then they come up to you afterwards and said, you've told my story. Exactly what you said. I had no idea what was going on, but everything you said spoke volumes to me. And so, one woman at a time, we're helping, but it needs to be greater than that. That's why I work in the workplace, training in the workplace, because we need greater volumes of people understanding this, not just one woman at a time, or a few women reading a magazine or a newspaper or a celebrity story and then not doing anything about it. We've got to get you to do something about it.
And just remind us again then, so let's have a look at the book again. Tell us the title.
It does say How to Survive Menopause
Without Losing Your Mind. Kathryn Colas. Brilliant. And where can people buy the book, Kathryn?
Well, they can buy it on any online bookstore, or they can buy it through my website, simplyhormones.com. And so either way. And if they do it through my website, they'll get a personal note from me. But otherwise, it's available. You can get it from the library. If they haven't got it, ask them to get it, because it's on the library deposit. And yeah, it's everywhere, but you may need to ask for it.
Brilliant. And how can people find out more about you?
They can. We now operate mostly under the Kathryn Colas Academy. So that's KathrynColasAcademy.com, because we have all our training on there. And we're very big on training trainers, professional trainers who are now looking to understand more about menopause and take that themselves into the workplace. We now train those people. And so they can do that from Kathryn Colas. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter. I think it's LinkedIn, Kathryn Colas, Twitter, Kathryn Colas, Simply Hormones, and Facebook. I think it's all under my name, but it might say Simply Hormones among those as well. So, and we're on Instagram as well, Simply Hormones on there, and Kathryn Colas Academy. So we're on what I call the big four social media sites.
Brilliant. Well, look, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. Thank you very much indeed. Really insightful, and that message of taking the time, reflecting on whether this is a relationship breakdown or whether it's the impact of menopause, I think is a really key message. So thanks very much for sharing that today, and hopefully people will buy the book and will look out for you on social media as well. So excellent. Thank you so much for joining me.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always. Thank you very much for asking me.
Well, it's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you. And of course, you can find out more about me and what we're up to at Kate_Daly. You can hear about new podcast episodes by following at divorce_podcast. And you can subscribe to this podcast by visiting thedivorcepodcast.com. Kathryn Colas, thank you very much indeed. And thank you for listening.